let's talk about after the tragic incident of the scouts, the Meraglim, as a consequence of which the generation of the Exodus is now sentenced to live out the rest of its existence in the wilderness. It's condemned to die in the wilderness without the guiding lights of the clouds of glory and the withdrawal of the divine until they die, except for a couple of people. After this tragic incident of the scouts, we learn of the Makoshesh. So let's share with you these 4 psukim that changed everything for us. The Makoshesh. And in this tragic episode that comes after the tragic episode of the scouts, we learn that when the Israelites were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks. Makoshesh Eitzim. Makoshesh Eitzim. That word Makoshesh is very problematic. We'll come back to that. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moshe and Aaron and all the congregation. And they placed him in detention, for it had not been explained what should be done with him. And God said to Moses, well, of course, he has to be put to death. And not only that, all of the congregation will stone him outside of the camp. So all the congregation took him outside the camp, and they stoned him with stones, and he died as God commanded. There are a number of problems with this. Rashi tells us that the Makoshesh had been warned by witnesses, because otherwise, how could you get the death penalty? A death penalty requires hasra. So Rashi has to insert a legalism by saying, don't think we just take someone out and whack him. No, no, no. He had hasra, he had witnesses. He had witnesses, and he had warning. He was given warning. Okay, fine. But he ignored them and continued collecting the wood. Now, everybody knows from earlier in Exodus, Mechalaleha mos yumas. Anyone who desecrates the Shabbos should surely die. So, until this point, what are they asking? Are they asking whether he should be killed? Or what's the manner of execution? Because we hadn't been told how a person should be executed. There are 4 ways. Cherek, chenek, skila, sreifa. Which of these types of execution? Maybe that's what they were asking. And Hashem tells them, well, we're going to give him the most chamur, the most strict. We're going to stone him with skila. But so many details of this incident are shrouded in mystery. The 3 being, for me, when, who, and what. When did this occur? Doesn't say. So Rashi cuts in, based on the Sifri, to tell us it was the second Shabbos in the wilderness. The second Shabbos in the wilderness he was already gathering. But the Ramban says that it happened after the incident of the scouts, which is exactly the order that we're hearing it in Bamidbar. Who was he? And what was his sin? That all comes up for dispute, and what does it tell us? So, first of all, when does it occur? It occurs Bamidbar, and we're going to cite for you Gemara in Shabbos, so I will share that with you. And it says here, Tana Rabbanon, the rabbis learnt, Mekoshesh Zeh Tzlofchad. The Mekoshesh, the gatherer, was none other than Tzlofchad. Why? Because it says, Vayiu b'nei Yisrael bamidbar vayimtzeu ish. Let's go to that pericope. That's our pericope. And it also says, Avinu meis bamidbar. Okay, so what we have to do there is go to that place. Where does it say that? At the end of Bamidbar, where the Benos Tzlofchad are coming to Moshe Rabbeinu, way further down. And the Benos Tzlofchad are the children, the daughters, the 5 daughters of Tzlofchad in Parshas Pinchas. And it says, Vatikra v'eno benos Tzlofchad ben Chafer ben Gilad ben Chir ben Menashe lemishpachos Menashe. It gives us the lineage of the daughters of Tzlofchad, showing their pedigree, going all the way to the Mishpachos Menashe. Ben Yosef. I mean, doesn't get better than that. Ve'ele shmos benosov. And now they even give you their names. A whole posuk is given us the pedigree of these 5 prominent women. V'ta'amodna lifnei Moshe v'lifnei Elazar HaKohen v'lifnei Anasir v'chol ha'edar. Remember v'chol ha'edar because that's in our pericope too. Pesach HaOmer. And now listen to what they claim. Avinu meis bamidbar. Fine. Avinu meis bamidbar. V'hu lo haya b'toch ha'edar. Now he wasn't with that gang, the gang of Korach. He wasn't with them. He had nothing to do with it. So, because we're told that if he had been ba'adas Korach, all those who were with Adas Korach, as Rashi will tell us, would not be able to have, and they were excluded from getting a piece of the land. So first of all, they say he was not part of that. Avinu meis bamidbar. He died in the wilderness. However, he was not part of that Korach Eder, had no adim al Hashem ba'adas Korach. Then what was he? Ki becheto meis ubonim lo hoyolo. He died in his sin. Wow. What does that mean? In his sin. And Rashi then quotes from our Gemara in Shabbos. In his sin meant that he was the Mekoshesh. He was the stick gatherer. He was the same Tzlofchad who we do not know who he was in our pericope. It doesn't tell us who he was. It says, Vayimtzeu ish. The Torah doesn't tell us who he is. But from the Benos Tzlofchad who said, Avinu meis bamidbar, our father died in the wilderness. And not only that, he wasn't part of the Korach conspiracy. And not only that, ki becheto meis, he was a single offender, and his offense was singular, and he died because of that offense, and he had no children. We learn from that in fact, that happens to be Tzlofchad. And the Gemara continues, the Gemara in Shabbos continues, that there's a machlokus between Rabbi Akiva and, here we go back to the Gemara in Shabbos, there's a machlokus between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Why? So Rabbi Akiva says what? He says, Avinu meis Bamidbar. Afkan Slofchod. Rabbi Akiva says, just like in our posuk it says Bamidbar, and here they say it's Bamidbar. Let's go back to the posuk so that you see his amazing drush. Let me get it, and I'm going to color code it for you. Do you see that? Vayu b'nei Yisrael bamidbar, and here Avinu meis bamidbar. So Rabbi Akiva is making a hekesh, a comparison. It's one of the 13 midos she'atorah nidareshes. There are 13 rhetorical strategies by which we learn Torah Sheba'al Peh from Torah Shebichsav, and one of them is a hekesh. One is a kal v'chomer, one is a gzeira shava, and one is a hekesh. So Rabbi Akiva is saying, there it says Avinu meis bamidbar, here it says Vayu b'nei Yisrael bamidbar. Therefore I connect the two identities, and the Ish therefore turns out to be none other than the father of the 5 girls claiming a piece of the land of Eretz Yisrael because he had no sons. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Now, listen to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira's response to him. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, Akiva, ben kach u ben kach ato osid litenes adin. Don't bring me your rhetorical strategies. You're going to have to give din v'cheshbon for what you just said. Why? What did he do wrong? Because im kidvorcha Torah b'saisu v'ato megale oso. Because with your words, by outing Tzolofchad, by telling us who that Ish was, the Torah wished to conceal his identity by saying, Vayimtza'eu Ish, in red. You see that? Ish, Makosha Sheitzim. And you have revealed himself. Atamotzi Laz al Oset Tzaddik, you are maligning that righteous man. Righteous man? We just got through saying he's a Makosha Sheitzim. Mechalaleho mos yumos. You're going to die. The only question was, how are you going to die? What type of death penalty? That was the thing. They came to God, ma ya'aselo. For sure they knew he had to die. He was a Makosha Sheitzim. Remember, there were 3 types of possible Av Malachas that he had violated. And we're told by the Chizkuni, well, we don't know which of the 3, but I'll come back to that. And so Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira is criticizing Akiva for outing that tzaddik. Why was he a tzaddik? And so we're told by the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, which is a very early witness, and if I can share that with you, the following. Targum Yonasan ben Uziel tells us something about what makes him a tzaddik. Targum ben Yonasan ben Uziel, which is 1st century, very early, and remember, Targum means translation, and it's a translation into the common lingua franca, which was Aramaic, not Hebrew. And the Targum says something very interesting. V'hava b'nei Yisrael shariam b'midbar. And he's translating our psukim. Gezerah Shabbos ishtamodalon. They knew about the Gezerah of Shabbos. They knew about it. Baram kanosha the Shabbos lo, but they didn't know which type of penalty of death was. Kom Gavra midvei Yosef. And so a man, Gavra means a very prominent man, from the house of Joseph said, Oma b'memra, what did he say? Aizil ve'etlosh kisin b'yom rishon. I'm going to go and I'm going to pluck branches on Shabbos, v'yechmun Yossi sa'adav yisanu l'Moshe Rabbeinu, and I'm going to do it v'yiduun Yossi b'chein k'nosol l'chol Beis Yisrael, so that I will show Kol Klal Yisrael what the fine is. What an outrageous thing to say. I'm going to make myself a martyr for the sake of Shabbos. I'm going to make myself a martyr. And the Netziv adds the following. The Netziv says, Shehamakoshesh niskaven l'shem shamayim. The Zayda, the Netziv, says the Makoshesh did this l'shem shamayim. The Yisrael savru she'ina Torah neges ela be'eretz Yisrael, because Am Yisrael thought that the Torah, like the Ramban says really, that what we're doing in Golus is just pantomime for the real deal, which is to keep the Torah in Eretz Yisrael. Eina Torah neges ela be'eretz Yisrael. And this pericope happened right after the Gezerah, that you will be stuck in the Midbar for 40 years. In Golus, outside Eretz Yisrael, V'lios golim mimokum lamokum, hayuleim din Golus, umishum hacher, lo hikri korban tzibah, and as a result of that, they no longer brought the korban tzibah. And there were those who thought shepeturim mimitzvahs ad sheyavo le'eretz Yisrael. The Netziv said they thought they didn't have to keep the mitzvahs until they came to Yisrael. So the Netziv is doing a twist on the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel. He had said, I have to show them what the type of skila they have to get, because they're not aware of the severity of the death penalty. I'm going to show them. The Netziv says even more in a kind of historical frame that the whole of Klal Yisrael was in doubt whether I even had to keep the Torah now that I'm in Golus. V'lozeh bo hamakoshesh. So the makoshesh comes laharos to show them sheyomisu oso al chilul Shabbos. And that's why it says, Vayu b'nei Yisrael b'midbar. This is what the Netziv is learning from the Hekesh of b'midbar and b'midbar. Not to identify tzlofchot the way Rabbi Akiva does, but in fact to tell them it was the state of being in exile, in being in b'midbar, that gave them the false impression, oh, we don't have to keep the mitzvahs. Absolutely stunning Netziv. Okay. Now, in fact, where do we get this idea that that there was an issue about the death penalty? So we have to go to the Gemara in Bava Basra, because the Bava Basra tells us the following. The Gemara in Bava Basra says, the following: the Yodea Hoya Moshe Rabbeinu shehamakoshish b'misa. Moshe Rabbeinu knew that the Makoshish would get death, because we knew that from the pasuk in Shmos chapter 31. Mechalaleho mos yumos. Aval lo Yodea be'eze misa hu yomus. And therefore uruya hoyso pashas Makoshish shetikase al yidei Moshe. Therefore, the Gemara says, it is fitting, and the Torah portion concerning the Makoshish of the wood gatherer was fit to have been written through God initiating a command to Moshe, not to teach us that he dies, but to teach us which form of court-imposed capital punishment is admitted to one who violates the Shabbos. And so this is to teach you that the merit is brought about by means of one who is meritorious, and liability by means of one who is liable. And therefore the daughters of Selofchad merited that the Torah portion concerning a positive matter be written through them, and the wood gatherer has a portion concerning the negative matter written through him. And so the Torah splits the two, because the Benos Slafchot, that ends up with a positive command. God says to them, Moshe doesn't want to give it to them. doesn't want to give them that peace in the land. We know it's all patrilineal, but there were no children, there were no boys to Tzlofchad. Moshe doesn't want to do it. It's Rebbeinu Shalom says, hey, no, they will get their portion in the land. And some say that's why they didn't get married till after they were 40, because they were waiting to hear the psak. They didn't want to follow the halacha in which their land would go over to the married husband. So they waited and they got married late. The 5 daughters of Tzlofchad are therefore treated in a positive manner, and the Torah separated the 2 pericopes to Tzlofchad's being separate from that. Okay. Now the Chizkuni tells us, let's just go back 1 second to that word Makoshesh, because it really bothered me. The Chizkuni says the Makoshesh Eitzim could have done one of 3 things, the word Makoshesh: gathering sticks, cutting down branches, cutting large sticks into small chips of wood, and carrying from one domain into another, meaning that it could have been any one of the 3 Av Malachas: plucking, heaping, or carrying daladamus from a reshus to a reshus. Look at that word Makoshesh. Kashash, to join closely, to collect. But in the Polel, Koshesh, Makoshesh, is plucking, gathering or plucking. So it's unclear from the etymology whether it's gathering or cutting down branches. Well, why am I telling you about cutting down branches? Because I want to show you a dazzling deeper aspect of what was going on. What was going on? As we look back at my color-coded 3-dimensional text, you can see light words, I call them. That means words that stick out of the text, making it 3-dimensional. Ish Makoshesh Eitzim, Vayikruvoso Makoshesh Eitzim. So I'm going to come back to this Eitzim business in a minute. Can you see El Moshe v'Aaron, El Moshe, Kasher Tzivo Hashem Es Moshe? That defines the literary style. But what's very interesting is the word Vayimtzeu. The Netziv said that they had guards on the border. It wasn't so poshut. They were looking out for people on the second Shabbos to make sure they were keeping Shabbos. Vayikruvoso hamotzim, and those are the guards that bring him to Moshe and Aaron. Vayotziu oso kol ha'edo el mechutz lamachaneh. Now let's go to this word ish makoshesh eitzim. Well, what else should he be makoshesh if not wood? So I want to share with you the Zohar. And I'm reading the Zohar as I want to do on Friday nights, which is the only time I can ever understand the Zohar on Friday nights. But I'm going to read to you from the Hebrew, and I'm going to let you follow along. In the Pritzker edition, jawohl. And it says, Omer Rabbi Chia, but let me read let me read the Hebrew, because the Aramaic actually. Omer Rabbi Chia, Vayimtzeu ish makoshesh eitzim. They found a man gathering eitzim. Okay. Well, what's eitzim? What is meant by the word eitzim, and who is the person? Well, the Zohar tells us, as we've learnt all morning, the identity of the person. Who is it? It's Tzlofchad. And what was he doing? Now, the Zohar doesn't treat the word eitzim as gathering wood. Oh, no. The Zohar says the eitzim are the trees. Oh. And the word gathering, he doesn't say gathering in the sense of pulling together, but koshesh means to examine, to discern, to differentiate the wood. So what is happening? Tzolofchad is mekoshesh eitzim b'yom HaShabbos, man eitzim hocha, uman huda, Tzolofchad have a dayek al ilan ilanin. He is examining these trees carefully. Why? Hominayu rav al achra. Which one is greater than the other? He shows no concern for the glory of his Lord and switched one Shabbos for the other. What on earth is the Zohar talking about? So to understand that, we have to understand what is really going on in the Zohar. What is the Zohar telling us? And the Zohar is telling us that the trees are not, the eitzim are not eitzim, tzolofchad is not tzolofchad. What is really going on is the eitzim are the two trees, the eitz hadas and the eitz hachayim. Tzolofchad is trying to understand the trees carefully. Which is greater, the tree of life or the tree of knowledge? Man eitzim hacha. And what does that mean? We know from Kabbalah that the divine is split into 10 personalities, called the Sefirot. They're part of what Shalom calls the Godhead. And they can be split into the masculine potencies, which is called Zoh, Zerampin, and the last one, which is Malchus, which is the Shechina, is the feminine divine. The Eitz HaChaim is the masculine, and the Eitz Hadas is the feminine. So when he is asking the question, I am examining these trees carefully, he is asking a fundamental question, an existential question as to who is involved in this whole business. We've just been sent into exile. Oh, you've been sent into exile? Well, who's responsible for that? Who is responsible for that? Well, is it the masculine potency or the feminine potency? Is it a legitimate question? And so he's saying, I want to be a better Oved Hashem. And therefore I need to ask this question. V'lo chashash likari demore. But by doing that, by splitting the masculine from the feminine, he had no, as he says here, concern for the glory of his Lord. Meaning, by doing that, he was in effect causing a split within the divine. By asking that question, he was doing the very same thing that Adam did by eating from the tree of knowledge. Why? Because there was only one tree in the garden. The garden was circular. There was a tree, betoch hagan, and Adam could only see double. He had double vision. He couldn't see the divine and the real world at the same time, like all of us. He was human. And God said, I don't want you to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because then you will cause death in the world, because you will then have split that one single tree into two, meaning that your intellectual knowledge of the divine, of the cosmos, will be split from your experience of the cosmos. As I've said many times, a person can experience lovemaking, and he can write a poem to his lover. Then along comes a professor of literature and can examine that poem and look at the syntax and the grammar and the literary quality, but he will and he could be teaching it for 10 years and never experience lovemaking. That's the difference between the tree of love, the tree of knowledge, and the tree of experience, the tree of life. And so Tzolofchad, by asking what aspect of the divine is doing it, is causing a pagam in the divine, because he now is doing what Adam Rishon did right in the beginning by eating of the tree of the fruit of knowledge of evil. The day you eat of that, you will be like one of us. You will have this intellectual knowledge, but then you will have lost the experience of lovemaking, and the two will never go hand in hand ever again. He was doing exactly the same thing. Pagam gadol lehafrid bein zun lemalchus, ve'achlif Shabbos leShabbos. And now he's saying something even greater in terms of the mystery of Shabbos, because what the Zohar is teaching us is that during the week we are living in the world of the Eitz Hadas. We can only appreciate the divine through the horoving in halacha and studying and working and living in the real world. But when it comes to Shabbos, we have a taste of Me'ein Olam Haba, which is a taste of the Eitz HaChaim. And the taste of that Eitz HaChaim is what? The taste of lovemaking as it is experienced of the divine. And what has he done by splitting? That process doesn't occur automatically on Shabbos. There are 3 sections of Shabbos. Friday night is the Suda of Yitzchak. It's the Suda of Gevura. It's the Suda by which we have to get away the schmutz of the week. We have to go to the mikveh. We have to read Shir Hashirim. We have to enter the divine slowly and carefully. And that is still part of the Eitz Hadas. Until Shabbos morning, where we surrender to the Eitz HaChaim, which is the Suda of Abraham, and by Shabbos, the holiest time of Shabbos, which is in fact Shalosh Seudos, there we are equal, where the Eitz HaChaim and the Eitz Hadas is identical and together, the holiest time of Shabbos. So the Zohar says, Tzolofchad, by asking that question, is doing the very flaw of Adam Rishon. He is splitting the divine into 2, which is going back to the Eitz Hadas and splitting it to the Eitz HaChaim, and therefore the Pagam is on Shabbos, which is the Shabbos Hamalka. It's the only time in the week that the queen, the Malchus, the last Sphera that has no light of its own, is joined with the masculine potencies. He has caused a split in that. So what makes him a tzaddik? According to the Zohar, what makes him the tzaddik? Remember, the pshat is he's a bad guy. He has to die. He's a Makoshesh Eitzim. The Medrash says, no, wait a minute. Rabbi Akiva tells us there's a hekesh between Bamidbar and Bamidbar. And the Bnei Tzlofchad said, Avinu meis Bamidbar, but he wasn't part of the gang. And therefore he's a big tzaddik. Why? Because the Targum Ben Yonason Uziel says he wanted to show Am Yisrael that this is so profound that you're going to get skila. And we are told, we knew that, but what type of skila? Oh, I'll show them what skila. And then he gets stoned. So bad guy, good guy, bad guy, tzaddik. What about here? What makes him a tzaddik here? Certainly from the pshat, the pashtus of the Zohar, he's not a good guy. Why? Because he was kotzeitz benatias, like Acher. He was cutting the roots. He was splitting. He was examining the roots. He was being medayik, which Akiva told Acher, when you get up there, al tikre mayi mayin. Don't split the upper waters from the lower waters. You may perceive it in your head, in your Eitz Hadas head, that there are 2 waters, but it's really all one. It's a unity, despite your intellectual splitting. It's a quantum mechanics, not Newtonian theology. But I would like to suggest, and from here on in, this is all my shtus, I would like to suggest that in fact he is a tzaddik. Because in my trajectory of a post-Holocaust world, he was right to question. He is looking at the Bnei Galut. He is saying, What, you just put us in Golos till we die? We're stuck in the Medbar? You took us out of Egypt, and now you had a rage attack because of the Meraglim, and now we're stuck, and we're until the last man dies, we have to be here? And this is what Golos is going to be in the future? There's going to be 4 other Goliases of Yovan and Modai and Rome, unending Jewish exile? This is what it's about? Really? Kotzetz Benetias? Let me examine which part of you is doing this. It can't be the Shekhinah, because she's with us. She's suffering with us. What he's doing, I think, is protest. He's saying, I've got to understand what's going on here, and I'll die doing it. I'd rather die doing it so that Am Yisrael can understand how you relate to us in Golos, because I don't. And so I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to pluck the roots. I'm willing to question the divine. I'm willing to try and understand how you can be split from her, and I'm not going to let you get back to her. Zoh and Malchus, Tiferes, Kuchibricha and Shechina. I'm going to hold off on that for a minute. Let's hold off on that. And therefore, as a result of holding of that, he was poigem in the kovod of the Ribono Shel Olam, because Shabbos couldn't be integrated. That was the secret of the Shabbos. The secret of what he did by being Mekoshesh Eitzim on the Shabbos is not in allowing that Shabbos to proceed because of the representation in his mind that the Jews can no longer suffer the way they had been. What is this business? The way Sarah Imenu, when she hears that Ke'ilu Shelo Nishchat, that the Malach HaMovet comes up to her and says, you know what your husband just did to Isaac? It's almost like he was slaughtered. He took the knife, and she didn't even let him finish. And she let out 7 tekios and Porcha Nishmasa, and she went upstairs. And I said up there, what did she go upstairs for? She went upstairs and said, this is what's going to happen to my children? That my children are going to be slaughtered on the history books, the altar of history? And she's shaking the Ribono Shel Olam. She says, I can't stay in this world. I got to go upstairs and fix this. I think that's what makes Tzlofchad the deepest tzaddik, that his daughters should merit. And how do I know it's true? Because God says to the Bnei Tzlofchad, Hein, Moshe Rabbeinu, you're wrong. They're going to get their portion. If you get your portion in Eretz Yisrael, it means your father was not part of Korach. He was not a Rosha. He was a big tzaddik. Tzlofchad the tzaddik is the way I want to end up. And may we all be, through his death and through his sacrifice and his self-sacrifice, we should all come closer to understanding the meaning of this unending exile, this darkness that we have to endure. Have a wonderful week, everyone.